Production dynamics, small to large. Large means full spectrum, small means less full. Quiet to loud, soft verse, loud chorus. Nirvana did that expertly. Example, closed hi-hat, open hi-hat, ride cymbal. All playing the same part, but getting bigger in the spectrum as you go along. That has to do with the arrangement that the musicians play. So, small to large would be start out with an acoustic guitar, the chorus comes in, and everybody falls in, and all of a sudden the spectrum's huge. And that's what sets apart the chorus. It doesn't always have to get louder. In a live performance perspective, usually performance art, people get quiet dynamically and then get loud dynamically to get that dynamic, the small to large kind of concept. Whereas in the recording studio, as you know, we don't want a ton of dynamics because equipment will overload, it won't translate as well when you broadcast it, all that kind of stuff when you commercially exploit it. So you kind of want to limit the dynamics, so what's the best way to do that is to have the spectrum less full and have the spectrum really full. And then it gives that feeling that it's getting bigger and smaller and accenting certain parts of the song. Okay, listening versus hearing. I love this discussion. I had this with my second engineer today. So listening in detail, individual sound elements versus hearing, stepping back, defocusing, hearing the big picture of what the song is. You have to do both. And you have to be able to switch back and forth from listening to hearing and hearing to listening. Otherwise, you sort of lose the overall picture of what you're doing, or you focus too heavily on one element and miss the forest through the trees, so to speak. Classic versus contemporary. What is the motivation to use effects in the first place? What is your motivation? I had this discussion with an artist who just wanted me to throw delay on this and put reverb on that and put a little phasing on that, see what that sounds like. And kind of like salt and pepper. He was just like spicing up the track. And I'm like, well, what's the motivation to do this? Is it furthering the song? Is it making the song better? Is it making the communication of what I'm trying to get to my listener more potent? You know, if you're singing a lonely song, maybe a little reverb and delay will further that mood. But if you're not, maybe it won't. So you can use effects to really help create the mood that you're trying to communicate versus just use them as salt and pepper. So I use, spice up your track with a cool delay here, or a little effect there. But that can also be useful. But know the difference of what you're doing and why you're doing it, is my big point about this. Okay, this is the last thing that I want to say about it, and I think that this is kind of important. Visual art and music, and how interconnected they are, at least in my mind. So I used to go to the art museum and walk around and look at the different types of art, reality-oriented, primitive, impressionist, pointillism, minimalism, modern art. All those different styles developed because people were looking for another way to communicate with their audience. In music, it's the same way. I've worked on very avant-garde music and very traditional music. Sometimes when you go look at a painting by Vermeer, it looks like a photograph. It's amazing. It's got perspective. You can almost see, looking through the window of the house, what the people are doing inside. It's like pretty amazing. That's very much like reality-oriented. Whereas you look at modern art, some of it's just so avant-garde that what were they trying to get across to you? Primitive art, even cave art, has its place and it has its real, it really speaks to people. And if you appreciate each one of these kinds of things for what it is, you can also feel the same way about different styles of music. For example, not to name any names, but there's a couple bands from the 80s that I just thought were just like cavemen. They were just like big guitars, no finesse at all. And I thought, oh, this is horrible. And then I really listened to it and thought, okay, well, it's like primitive music. And the subject matter was really primitive. But they did it really well and really communicated with their audience and sold a lot of records because of it. Whereas you look at, Steely Dan, very exquisite, like reality-oriented, every part fits in its place, and it's just really exquisite sonically. Totally different than a jazz record, which is tons of emotion, totally different than classical. But all of these things have their own place. And I like to really relate it to art. I get ideas when I go into museums about music. And so actually, I did try one thing, and I'll leave it at this last story. I'm from Chicago. I went to the Art Institute. I was visiting family in Chicago, and I went to the Art Institute of Chicago, and they have the George Seurat painting that's very famous, A Day in the Park, which is pointillism, which is where you just put dabs of paint, different colors, and then when you step back, you see the picture. When you step forward, all you see is these dabs of colors everywhere, and instead of brush strokes. And it was very much the forerunner of halftoning, so to in art. I started thinking about this, and I was working with a band that was game for anything. It was back in the day when you could be very avant-garde and be kind of cool in the college market. I told the band, I said, look, you guys, why don't you all sing the lead vocal? All of you guys. We'll get a good lead vocal from each one of you. And then when we mix it, we'll just line up all the vocals and we'll randomly mute from one to the next. In the middle of words, wherever, it doesn't matter, just do it. And that was my way of breaking up little chunks of the lead vocal into points. And it sounded really cool. It was really kind of cool. But that's what inspired me to try it. The label goes, what is this? And, I thought we were being pretty avant-garde. So that's the kind of things that you can do by being inspired by other things than music and other musical styles that you hear. You can be inspired from other avenues and use the musical tools that you have at your disposal and your production to create something that people have never heard before. And that, I think, is the crux of what I'm trying to say, is use your creative imagination and don't be limited by how everyone else sounds or what everyone else does. If it sounds good to you, you might find that there's a lot of other people that think it's really cool too. Hope I got you thinking a little bit.